We are happy to be welcoming Gerry Byrne, the head coach of Harvard. A little background on him. Gerry grew up in Levittown, New York, where he attended Chaminade High School on Long Island. He played college lacrosse at UMass, followed by a professional career playing both outdoor and pro indoor lacrosse. His coaching career includes over 20 years of coaching experience, most notably spending 16 years as the assistant coach at Notre Dame and being recognized in 2011 as Coach of the Year. Assistant Coach of the Year. This past July, he ultimately made the move to become the head coach of Harvard. And again, we're excited to have Coach Byrne join us and would like to thank him again for taking the time.
Hey, thank you. And perfect timing. My wife just walking in from work. Thanks for having me, fellas. And I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you, have some laughs, talk about lacrosse, and hopefully share some value with your audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the first kind of questions, obviously we're all dealing with the COVID-19 situation, and college lacrosse kind of the landscape kind of changed a little bit. Talk to me about how you're kind of dealing with that with your current players and staff.
You know, I don't think there's a playbook. I think we were fortunate in hindsight to be at a place like Harvard that we had a kind of a forecasting that this could potentially happen. So I think we had a couple of days, heads up that this could happen. So it allowed us to think about how we might communicate with our players and our recruits and things like that. But there's nothing that prepares you for it. I like to read, and I like to read case studies and business articles and things like that. So you can go back and look at, what did Johnson & Johnson do when there was a Tylenol scare 30, 40 years ago, or, what happened when the subprime market crashed, and, how do you learn from these really terrible situations? And so, but there's nothing that prepares you for it. I think, what I think nearly every coach is trying to do is, all right, trying to figure out what's the schedule of communication with your players. How much coaching are you doing? How much advice and insight are you doing? How often are you doing Zoom? How often are you texting? And I think everybody's kind of using, a little trial and error to figure out what works. But what may work for Harvard might not work for another program. And so I think there's a lot of trial and error. But I think this is a tremendous opportunity for a program to almost test and practice either a philosophy or a strategy around certain things. So whether it's giving independence and autonomy to your upperclassmen, or letting some of your leadership run the workouts and things that are taking place. I'm a big fan of that. And I think that this is an opportunity because we may not be together again until next September. So instead of trying to micromanage everything, my approach has been to listen and watch and delegate and empower and give my guys a chance to grow. And because I think you can make some mistakes right now that aren't going to come back and bite you next April. There's a lot of time, and who knows how long we're going to be at home. And so you better be pacing yourself with your messaging and how you manage and how you lead, because you don't want to get Niedermeyered 3 months later, killed by his own troops. Yeah. And so that's a Animal House reference if you guys didn't get it, any of your listeners at home. But I don't want to get Niedermeyered, so I would like them to work with me in a real collaborative way to help manage 30-something guys and then potentially integrate our incoming class. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I think the short answer is nobody has the perfect solution, but you have to be really open to being really attentive to what's working, what's not working, because you have time to switch things out. Hey, this really works. Let's continue to do that. This isn't working. Let's stop doing that. I think you have to be kind of open to both of those things.
Yeah. Now, a like almost a controversy going on right now is the kids getting granted an extra year of eligibility, except, all right, for those kids that maybe go to like an Ivy League school, or the Ivy Leagues won't let them kind of return. Can you kind of talk about that? And I guess, like, some people might be like, man, like, the Ivy Leagues are kind of like they might get hurt by this. How do you feel about that?
I kind of how I feel is almost irrelevant. I mean, I think anybody who went through having to get your team together and let them know that their season, and for some of them, potentially their careers were over, there's nothing that prepares a coach for that. There's no grad school class and how to deliver that message. But like in that moment, in those first like 72 hours where everybody went through this, you actually saw, a lot of lessons. The fact that the Ivy League was one of the first leagues, if not the first league to do this, people were berserk, and mostly they were berserk because they see it through the prism of their own, their fandom or their allegiance and fidelity to a school or a program, and people were completely unglued and again emotional, right? And how little we knew about the virus. And so now you fast forward 6 weeks later, I don't think people feel the same way. But right in that moment, and this is ultimately my feeling on it, there was universal, as the world, and as the world became aware of what the virus was going to do and potentially do, we all had shared pain. And so if you were a college athlete of any sport, if you were a spring athlete, you were all in the same boat. And I think there was tremendous power in that. But it's also true of the person who was doing their dance thesis or producing a play in the spring of their senior year at Harvard or high school. Everybody was treated the same. It was completely democratic because everybody was in the same boat. And now you have a completely different scenario where the Ivy League has decided one thing and the rest of the country has decided something else. And that basically pulls that scab back off. And so when it was universal, you couldn't have an argument to say, is it worse for Harvard, who was 2-2 and new coach, new program, trying to figure things out, or was it worse for Princeton, who was 5-0 and had a seminal player and things like? You couldn't debate that, like, because it's painful for both, and you have arguments on either side, but both shared pain. And so, I was a big not a big advocate in the fifth year because I knew once you started splitting this is when it would become terrible. And then you had to make financial decisions, and families would have to make financial decisions, and teams would have to make decisions on bringing in transfers or which of their seniors are they going to bring back and that they can afford. So it now creates all these layers that are really human and really costly on a lot of levels. And so, as much as I would have loved to have my guys back, if that was the universal decision of all the programs, I would have been all for it. But the fact that, the Ivy League made this decision, it's above my pay grade. And I shared my feelings that I would love to have our guys back. But once it became a presidential decision at the Ivy League level and an athletic director's decision at their level, but even within that, there'll be Ivy League guys back in the Ivy League because each school, I think, has the autonomy to do some of these things. Some schools have the ability to have guys have to get second majors. Some do not have some semester rules. Harvard has you can only be at Harvard for a certain number of semesters. Withdrawal is at a lot of the Ivy League schools it's fraught with some, you can leave, but we can't always guarantee you that you can come back. And so, when everybody started customizing these potential solutions, that's where we are now. So how I feel about it is kind of irrelevant because I don't have any power to change. And I can't think of the psalm, but I try to be rational about the things that I can affect and the things that I can't. And trying to focus on our team. All of our seniors have great career paths and great opportunities going, but I do miss them. I do. It's sad to not think about your season ending on the field, where at least you can look back and maybe you have some regret about how you played, but you had the opportunity to perform and the scoreboard told you what your next outcome was going to be. The fact that you can't do that is really sad, but the fact that some of these guys and gals will be able to work that out, good for them. It just won't be at Harvard.
Yeah. I can only imagine, like you were referencing, I mean, at some of the schools, you got kids that are going to be returning, you got all these transfers coming, and then you got incoming freshmen. So essentially you got a class of like 20 freshmen. I mean, it must be, some coaches must be going mad just trying to figure out like every player. They got to try to figure out, is this a 4-year guy? Is this a 5-year guy? Do I even maybe recommend maybe he doesn't come back? I don't know. It's crazy.
No, listen, this is, the law of unintended consequences.
Yeah.
When this was announced, I think the NCAA, out of like a real human, like, we need some good news. There seems to be a lot of clamor for this. There's smart people that work there, but I don't think they factored in the cultural piece, which you just referenced. I don't think they factored in the financial piece in a time where, every university's endowment is probably down 30%. And you're going to have to pay more and spend more and make some of those decisions. Yes, Mike, you can come back. Jake, you can come back. Gerry, you can't come back. We don't have any money for you. And so, those conversations, and your team is bigger at a time where the financial pressures on athletics is really intense. You're going to have more expenses, or you're going to have the same amount of money, but we'll be able to spend less per athlete. So you got that effect. And then you have the cultural piece, which is, listen, adding talent is very tempting, but if you don't know, how they're going to integrate in your locker room, integrate into your system, how your existing players are going to accept that guy. Hey, you recruited me. I've been here for 3 or 4 years, and now you're bringing in a mercenary into my program. And even the best guy has got to, even the best player and the best person who, there's 3 or 4 really obviously high targets for these 50 years. Even the best guy in that situation, he's got to balance his confidence in his game because you can't get to the level of being one of those really great players if you don't have confidence in the work ethic, and be some level of deferential and subservient and how do I fit in? This is not like the NFL where they drop and add guys every week and they know it's a business and it's clearly a business and they're making those decisions. This is the ecosystem of a team is a very volatile thing. And if you bringing in the wrong guy and spending money that maybe was supposed to go to somebody else, and that guy doesn't work out from a wins and losses or from a culture standpoint, you can pay the price of that for a couple of years. Yeah. And so that's why I think you haven't seen a lot of these guys land yet, because I think there's a financial piece. There's a navigating, what you're doing with your existing seniors if you're at one of these programs, and what is your school going to fund, and what can a parent support? Like, if you're Joe Blow from Kokomo and you love your son, but your job is in jeopardy and your retirement's been hit 30%, you're making a tough decision, to play the 8 games that you missed. Is that, and are you going to get another degree? Is it going to be some joke? Is it worthwhile? Are you a mercenary, or were you planning on doing 5th year? Like, there's so much that goes into it. And on one hand, I love being in the mix of all that stuff back in the day. The fact that I'm not, and I can't be, is somewhat liberating. And I think there's a win for the team, the handful of teams in our league that won't have, 50 years. I think there's a win for us in recruiting, because it's always a competition when you come in as a recruit. And now you don't have to recruit against returnees and transfers and things like that. The fact that it's a relatively clean slate, I think that's going to be attractive to parents and prospects.
Yeah, I think you kind of already answered this question, but if I'm a coach, you're a really competitive guy.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit. Yeah, all right. But doesn't it piss you off? Maybe I can't do that on this interview.
No, you can say that. It's fine.
All right. Doesn't it make you upset that it's like, shit, like, now I'm going to have to go against teams that have 24-year-olds on the team now because they're taking a 5th year, and I'm not able to do that. You know what I mean? There's a difference between a 24-year-old and a 19 or 20-year-old. My best lacrosse was the first couple of years. Like, I felt I was my best player the first couple of years out of college. You know what I mean? And now these guys are all coming back.
I don't listen, you can call it a rationalization on my part, but I think that you still only allow 10 people on the field. And there is a curse of the gluttony of too much talent. So if they have, if you have too many really good guys and only so many can play, you better manage a culture very carefully. And that's why you see so many people transfer and leave places, because they chose to go to a place because maybe lacrosse was the only reason. And now when lacrosse isn't working out, that's why you're seeing so many people leave. Even before the pandemic, you're seeing a lot of people leave because they didn't go for multiple reasons. They went for one reason. And so as far as like being upset about it, I'm looking for the silver lining in it. I'm looking for potential future recruiting opportunities to say that, hey, you're going to come into a competitive environment, but you don't have to worry about some of the other things, the other schools that you might be considering having, several years of players returning and several years of fifth year guys and not only fifth year guys from their program, fifth year guys from other schools. So I think there's an attractive element in that. And again, like I just said, you still only allow 10 guys on the field. And I like the challenge of it, because I think you can recruit against that. And just because you're older doesn't always mean you're better. And because some guys may not be working as hard as they need to work on right now for that opportunity. So I rationalize it in that way, that we'll do what we can do and and as a result, to your question, we'll have to do it at a higher level, no doubt. If there are teams on our schedule, and there'll be teams in our league that will have some of their guys return, or guys who come to do a graduate year at some, not a graduate year, but get a second major at some of these places. There are teams in our league that will allow that. And so I can't do anything about it. And so I like the challenge of having to do what we're already doing better to confront that.
Yeah. It's good perspective on it with the 10 guys on the field. Yeah. And I also feel, not to keep the discussion going, but I also feel like some people, they see this like everybody's kind of recognizing like one or two like special transfer cases. I mean, and then every other college kid thinks that maybe he can go and have a better experience. But I don't know. I agree with your rationale that it's like, hey, maybe I can recruit against it. I don't have to deal with that at school. So
yeah, I just don't know. Let's say that there's 100 people in the portal right now, and I told all of my seniors that if they were interested, that they should look into it and see what the market, because it's a weird market right now. The marketplace for that, because of all these schools being unsure of what of their existing seniors are coming back. The top programs are all fighting for those 2 or 3 of the most talented guys that are in there that are coming from these other programs. Some of those programs are still fighting to find the money to have some of their seniors come back. And, maybe you don't want some of them to come back. And so you can use some of that money to go after the really attractive guy in there. But most of guys in the portal are pretty good to really good players who just want to play another year.
Yeah.
And I assume since they're in there that they have the endorsement of their parents and things like that, and affordability, and these schools aren't cheap. And so, but you haven't heard a lot of where these guys are landing, because I think all the culture, affordability, admittability, all that stuff is still being worked out. So who knows what it's going to look like. And with the pressure that all schools are under right now financially, I think there's going to be a price to pay 3 or 4 years from now, and maybe sooner, where all these people who clamored for their 5th year, it causes the demise of not their program, but maybe the amount of scholarships that they get and the amount of financial aid. So be careful what you wish for, because the piper is going to need to be paid.
Yeah. All right, enough of that. Let's I'd love to hear like your history on kind of like beginning to be a lacrosse coach. I know you've I was looking back in your background. It looked like you actually went to Harvard. I'm sorry, you went to Notre Dame for a little bit of time and then left and coached at St. Anselm. And just wanted to hear a little bit about like how you got into coaching and everything.
Well, like most things, it was fortunate. Good luck. I coached at Notre Dame. I got my MBA at Notre Dame in the early '90s. So I had worked in New York in finance in the mid to late '80s, and then there were a bunch of what they back then they considered Black Mondays and Black Tuesdays, and right now that would be considered a good day right now. But there were some tough days, and I realized I didn't want to be in that world, and so I went back and got my MBA at Notre Dame and in communications and marketing and management, brand management. So I was able to coach. My Kevin Corrigan and my older brother Steve were roommates at Virginia, teammates, and so Kevin had just became the coach there in 1988, 89, and I was his first assistant coach. And so I was able to go to school. Notre Dame was able to help with that. And so I was able to get my master's degree. And then, so I did that and came back to the working world and did that and ended up kind of really focusing on sports marketing for 5 or 6 years and had some senior executive positions in a couple of different companies. And I got let go from a public company, and I was able to get a year's severance as a result of being let go. And that was right around the time that my wife and I adopted 2 boys. So it was kind of a convergence of life and not having to worry for a year about where I was going to work and whether I was going to work. And we adopted these 2 boys, and so we needed to integrate them into our family. And so it was kind of perfect timing. And we were living in southern New Hampshire at the time, in Amherst, New Hampshire, and they needed a high school coach. I was playing in the MLL at the time. I was one of the oldest guys in the MLL at that time, and we adopted the boys, and I volunteered to coach this high school team. And from there, I could say that I never worked again. So I ran a lot of camps. I had a small sports marketing consulting business that I was doing on the time. I was coaching, playing, and just kind of the great thing about coaching and why I think a lot of people coach is, the X's and O's piece is really important, no doubt. You have to have a certain level of a command there. You don't have to be an X's and O's genius, and I know I'm not one, but you have to have a certain level of ability there. But the connectivity with parents and kids, I think, is as powerful of a drug there is in mankind. And so that kind of reawoke in me, missing that connection. Not that you can't have that in business, but it's just not the same. And so I coached at this high school, Souhegan High School in southern New Hampshire, and then I coached at St. Anselm College. I was prepared to teach and coach there. And so that made it really doable from a financial standpoint. So I was going to be a marketing professor there and coach. And so that was going along really well. And I was doing some consulting on the side. So, financially it was a win-win. My wife is a OBGYN surgeon. And so we had young family. So, and I really got back into coaching. And then Kevin Anderson, who used to be the head assistant at Notre Dame, was stepping down. And I happened to be working the Notre Dame lacrosse camp that summer, and started a conversation with Kevin Corrigan about coming back. And then I convinced my wife. My wife's a Notre Dame graduate as well, and so I talked her into coming back to South Bend. And so that's how it kind of happened. Part of it was career struggles that I was having and losing a great job, and the opportunity that afforded. They say one door closes, another door opens. And that's kind of what happened in volunteering to be a coach at the high school level in the town. Just, wanted to be a good citizen of the town that we lived in. And then that just kind of morphed from there.
Yeah. Obviously, over the years, Notre Dame has always had essentially very well known to be having the best defense in the country, or one of the best defenses in the country year in, year out. The other day we were on a call with John Sexton, and I was joking with him because I was saying, you know, because he was an exciting player to watch, picking up ground balls, throwing checks between the lines. And I know that you probably had to keep a pretty tight leash on him his freshman year. And I asked him about like his leash, and he said, yeah, you know, I got the film session, I'd get torn apart a little bit, but every now and then coach would let me go. So I guess I just was curious on like your dynamic on maybe how you coach each player, like, you know, and so forth.
Well, you know, John was unique. You know, ironically, like, you know, my generation, my brother Steve is one of the great takeaway defensemen of all time. Probably, you could argue, probably the first great instrument of, you know, offensive defenseman. Not offensive in the sense of scoring, but offensive in the sense of imposing athleticism and takeaway ability on an opponent. He was one of the first, you know, Mark Greenberg from Hopkins, and my brother Steve is probably the next iteration of that guy. So I grew up, you know, both my brother and I started playing late. My brother started playing when he was a sophomore. I started playing the spring of my junior year in high school. So even though we were from a town that was crazy passionate about the sport, that we had played other sports. And so, but watching my brother develop, just as a setup to answering your question, is that, you know, that's what I come from. I wanted to be my older brother, and he was lefty and I was righty. And I don't think I ever became as good of a takeaway defenseman as he was, but that was the goal. The goal was, in that, you know, early 80s, mid 80s, don't slide to me. I'm going to own this guy. That's why when you watch those highlights, there's never any slides. The team defense is horrific until Coach Tierney basically installed a slide and recover defense at Princeton. You just didn't help guys, because guys would get pissed. Like, if you got slid to, like, if I was guarding you and you came and helped me, I'd be like, yo, blank, blank, blank. What the hell are you doing? That guy can't do anything to me. So, but, you know, Coach Tierney kind of revolutionized, you know, the concept of team defense. Also a fellow Levittown guy, same hometown, is, you know, so that when I came back to coaching, if you had a guy who had a sense of how to do it, it's not like you gave him license, but what I would try to teach him and coach him within our broader and bigger system. And, you know, I remember we had a guy, Andrew Irving, who was an All-American long stick midi for us, great player. And John came in after him. And I remember after one of the practices, John's freshman year, I told him, I go, you need to call Irv and explain, you know, he'll explain to you how you get on the field. Because if you keep on doing this, you're not going to get on the field. And John was crazy talented. And I know he reached out to Irv because what I would tell John and Irv and some of the really good takeaway guys we had is that if you play like the way we play, you'll have more opportunities to take the ball away from guys. You'll have more ground balls. You'll be able to run the field and do the shooting and scoring that you like to do. But you need to do this. Before you get to do what you want to do, I need you to do what you need to do. And that's what you have to do. So John, you know, ended up winning the Schmeiser and being a, I don't know, 3-time first-team All-American. You know, John was crazy gifted you know, John's a good athlete, not a freaky athlete, but John has great spatial awareness and anticipation. And once John kind of played within the way that we wanted to play off-ball defense, and I packaged it in the way which was, you'll have more ground balls, more takeaways. That's when it all came together for him. But John is, you know, John was unbelievably coachable, crazy competitive. He's, you know, was roommates with my son Pierre, and, you know, a great, you know, friend of our family. And John's one of my all-time favorite guys.
Yeah, I remember 2 or 3 years ago, I was up in Placid, and you and I were playing together. And I remember, I remember vividly, maybe like the first possession of the other team, you came out and just smashed a guy in the arm. I'm like, I don't know if he coaches that way. You know what I mean?
What did you do when you can't move anymore? No, I'm not, you know, I think coaching, you know, I'm probably one of the basic tenets of what I believe about team defense is communicating and convincing and helping understand your guys about how they're all connected. They're interconnected. They're interdependent. They have to understand that emotionally, intellectually, spatially. Because if you never understand that, you'll always do what you like to do and what you want to do.
Yeah.
And so that's what's woven throughout my time in South Bend has been communicating that, and then doing the drills and the language and the repetitions that reinforce that to help guys understand the cost and the benefit of doing it right versus doing it wrong, and packaging that around what it means to your teammate, what it means to the possession, what it means to your team, what it means to success and failure. So I think if you did a Zoom with a bunch of the guys that I coached at Notre Dame, I think, the message would be there was definitely an intensity. It was never personal. It was all about the stop. And as a goalie, I know you appreciate it. It was all about making it hard for your opponent to get great shots. It doesn't mean the goal shouldn't be taking away great shots. You just want to make it a miserable slog to get that great shot. Slide and recover, ball pressure, communication, approaches. And the power and the collective and the aggregate of consistently getting stops it just lays on top of your opponent. And now it becomes this battle between your discipline and determination of how you play and their willingness for patience. And that's why, if you look back, some of the great games that we had were against Maryland and Denver and Duke, because all of those teams had the patience, they had the skill, and why those games were so powerful to watch. And I love them. I mean, I'd say to Matt Brown before every game, like, here we go again. I love playing and coaching against you. It sucks to lose some of those, no doubt, but we won our share, they won their share, and you got to love the battle of those. And, I've told that to him dozens of times. And, but that was what I was trying to create. And it appeared to take away some of the individuality, but some guys were perfect for that system. Other guys, John was not a perfect fit, but he was so talented and so athletic and he, I compromised a little and he compromised, and we met in the middle and allowed him to become a great player.
One thing I know, a couple years ago, you invited us down to come out to a practice. And one of the cool things that I guess was like an eye-opening thing that I noticed was, your attention to detail and the skill. So, for example, like if you watch game film and you watch one of your defensemen goose the ball out and then, get the ball and throw like an underhand pass to one of their teammates. And legitimately at practice, you had all the defensemen take a ball and just goose the ball like down the entire field. And I remember going to you and be like, you guys practice this? And your response is like, well, if I'm expecting a guy to do it in a game, he better be able to, we're practicing every skill that's necessary. And I feel like a lot of coaches, that maybe are going to listen to this, they sometimes take those small little things for granted, especially top players in the country, you're coaching and just making sure they're doing things the right way, which I thought was really cool.
If you think back to your favorite grammar school or high school teacher, there was something, great about them. They made the subject come to life. They made it understandable, and usually how they did it was to break it apart to its smallest elements. So whether it was learning algebra or the quadratic equation or whatever it was, that they came up with some mnemonic, memorization tool, or just did it in a way where you were like, your head was nodding and you totally got it. And I think all of us that coach and teach try to bring elements of that, to what they do. And I believe that, that practice is your opportunity to kind of rehearse the things that you want to become good at. And I also am a pretty critical eye in film, as John Sexton alluded to, is that while you're doing that, you start realizing, what, he's not the only guy not doing that well. Or we keep on giving up a goal a game because of that. We need to make up a drill that addresses it. So that's the simple kind of mentality, is something you're not doing well, and how do you make a drill that teaches it? So whether it's teaching double teams or teaching some of this other stuff, is you got to do that in a really, you got to do that in a way that that's sticky for your guys. Hey, I'm realizing I'm running out of power here. Do you want to pause and come back? Is that doable?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Let me go find my power cord.
All right. Well, wanted to shift gears a little bit. I know that Jake alluded to it earlier. One of the things that just kind of like, I felt like over the years, obviously you being the long time and recognized assistant coach, at Notre Dame for so many years, then just, I felt like job postings would happen every year. Your name would be brought up every single time. Just kind of curious on your perspective on like, deciding to turn down jobs and then finally ultimately taking this Harvard position. I guess walk us through some of that, kind of the ups and downs of making the decision. Obviously I believe like family had a lot to do with it and timing of things, and kind of, would love to hear the story about some of that.
I think just to preface that, I think, they're in the middle of a, major search right now at Hopkins, is that, most college coaches are, part of a family and their significant other works. And, it's not as simple as big time basketball and big time football where, the concept of moving is, relevant to millions of dollars, and guarantees and all of those things. And so you always, with lacrosse, and if you're older in particular, you're factoring in, how happy are your kids? Where are they going to school? Where are they in that whole, age group? Are they about to, juniors in high school and that's really disruptive, or are they about to go into high school and maybe, you can deal with that transition? How successful is your significant other? My wife is, is maybe one of the best doctors in South Bend. She's great at what she does. She's unbelievably accomplished. So, where are your kids, in their own pursuits and friendships and things like that? So it's financial, it's family, it's timing. There's so much that goes into it. So when you, and not that I do, but, I know people who do, is that they're reading all these chat boards and comments and they're like, how is that guy not taking that job? And it's not as simple as it appears. And then the converse is, I was in a great place. I went at one of the great universities of the world when I was at Notre Dame, and had a great position, had, great autonomy and support from Coach Corrigan and from the university. I felt like I had one of the 5 best jobs in the country when I was here. And so, it's not as easy as cut and dry as saying, why would you want to stay there? As far as, opportunities that came up over the last 10 to 15 years, I was contacted and in some cases pursued opportunities and, was afforded the opportunities to decide on all of them. And in some cases, it, went to I'm going to decide the next morning. You put your head in your pillow and you're not sure, because one of the things that you don't know as you move and take opportunities is, and the thing you'll never know is like, what is this going to mean to your family? And that was always the obstacle for me. The lack of knowing what this would mean for my 3 kids, my relationship with them. I knew my wife would never be able to move right when I would move. And so that, all of those things, the unknown of that emotionally, because you couldn't resolve it in your head intellectually. That was always the thing for me, and why I could never decide whether to take an opportunity or not. That crippled me. And I would get to I'm being totally genuine and totally honest. It was crippling. So, because you had this professional aspiration where, I need to find out whether I can do this at a really, really high level. And, the confidence that you may have in yourself and your ability to recruit and coach and build a culture and all those things, like that aspiration and that desire is unfettered. It's like, it consumes you. And then, so you have the known of that, and the known that somebody would like you to come and become their head coach. And then you have the flip of that, which is this unknown of, will my family be okay? Will this hurt my marriage? Will this hurt my relationship with my kids? And, during that whole time, my kids were, just about to start at Culver or just about to start at Notre Dame. And I'm coaching my son. Those are all like thrown into the mix, and there were opportunities when my kids were still at Notre Dame that they were really supportive of, and that really helped, but I could never resolve it in my own head and heart. And that's what ultimately made me say no a bunch of times. And as far as what happened this time, I think the combination of my kids being out of college and being open to, as I told my wife, a sense of adventure, the fact that Harvard was really enticing because there was a similarity to the type of student and athlete that I would be recruiting, the fact that it was the preeminent, academic university in the world was attractive. The fact that they, had struggled finding consistent success was really attractive. And being in a place like Cambridge and Boston, was really attractive. And it was really hard, recruiting all the guys to Notre Dame and those relationships. And, the fact that I got tremendous support from them and advocacy from them was, made me feel better about it. And then ultimately, my wife being, because she's tremendously successful in what she does, her support and her openness to it, all of that stuff made it the right time. I know that was a long answer, but it's a complex, it's a complex thing because it's human and it's financial and it's timing and it's unknowns and, all of that came together. It still had an element of that for sure, ultimately pulling the trigger. And one of the things that I would always do, not on purpose, but it would get to that I'd be so conflicted about deciding that I would almost make them get, hey, we need an answer.
Yeah. Well, I know, the way you answered it makes a lot of sense. And so as outsiders, sometimes people are like, what? I can't believe he's not taking this opportunity. But again, there's always more to the story. And obviously I appreciate you answering that. And I guess one of the things that you just mentioned, not to say that, Harvard has had, bad seasons. They haven't been the top team in the Ivies, but it sounded like you said that attracted you, that kind of challenge of kind of going in, and so forth. And so I guess kind of talk me through when you decided to take the position, getting to know the guys, like what was your kind of first order of business once you actually came on board?
I felt like, and I actually just discovered this piece of paper the other day because I wrote it down, and it was almost like, this is what we have to do. We have to illuminate Harvard to the whole lacrosse world. And by illuminating, I mean pulling back the curtain, explaining, redefining, opening up what can appear to be an intimidating and mysterious place, because it's so prevalent in our culture, aspirationally, in finance and in art and in architecture and in law. It's everywhere, but it's also unknown because maybe a lot of people don't know people who went to Harvard. And so Harvard has been defined by whatever our culture and media has said it is. So the first order of business, besides obviously connecting with your players that you're inheriting and starting the recruitment of the 2020 class, I think from a communication standpoint and a research standpoint is that we need to define Harvard the way Harvard should be defined relative to the lacrosse audience. And so that was the first order of business. The first order of business was digging deep and understanding it. And it was understanding admissions. It was understanding the student athlete experience. It was, what the career paths and what the academic paths were, because we needed to be able to articulate it in a way that not only that we could understand, but the universe of lacrosse, high school coaches, travel coaches, prospects, parents. So we went about that in a really focused way. I remember we had our first staff meeting in Western Massachusetts. Al Littell, who used to be our director of operations, at his parents' house in Longmeadow, Massachusetts. And I brought these massive Post-it notes, and I'm kind of that guy. And I made these list of all these words that started with the letter C. It just started coming out that way. And we would write things on these things, and that became kind of we need to focus on, communication and competitiveness and community and all these, these words, cash. We need to run events and things like that. And so we put all these things up, and I discovered that list of things from that first meeting. It was amazing how many things we checked off and achieved in 8 months. And so, but the first thing was understanding Harvard, articulating Harvard, making Harvard understandable to all these audiences, making it achievable, making it aspirational. And if we can do that, we'll broaden the universe of people who maybe didn't see themselves as Harvard candidates. And I can think of a couple of recruits who didn't see themselves that way. And until we used video and virtual tours and photos and alumni, until we did that, we were able to convert a lot of prospects who didn't see themselves necessarily as Harvard people, because in their minds, Harvard people was defined by Hollywood and the media, and our redefining of it made it feel like there's people like me here. And that became a mantra for me. We need to make it clear that there's people like you at Harvard. And Harvard is an unbelievably diverse place. More than 50% of this year's freshman class was non-white. And as a result, it's the first school in the history of American education, besides a hysterically black college or university, that could say that. And so as a result, and Harvard gives a tremendous amount of financial aid, is that it wasn't just this monolithic place where everybody had numerals after their names and was a Rockefeller or a Carnegie or a Morgan. No, everybody's here. So once we were able to do that, the universe of people who became possible prospects for Harvard became massive. And and we're still doing that to this day.
Yeah, well, I know we touched on it even before the interview started, just like your willingness to go the extra mile, essentially not on the field. So like a lot of people kind of look at like, all right, the coach, he's going to be working with the kids and the players, locker room, out on the field. And then your willingness to connect. And I know part of the reason was to, like you said, to make Harvard and yourself accessible to everybody. And as soon as you took that position, like immediately I started seeing like YouTube videos of like the tours and like, the instructional stuff that you're doing right now. I mean, honestly, I'm a person, I know I speak for a lot of people. Like, I thank you for doing that, because you provide a lot of educational stuff that actually a lot of coaches forward along to their teams, other coaches and stuff like that. It's actually, without even maybe realizing, you're actually helping grow the game through like a lot of those videos and stuff, which is awesome.
It's the right thing to do as a lacrosse community citizen, sharing. We all kind of copy and customize, whether we take something from another sport or we take it from another coach. You go to the coaches conventions and you're always looking for drills and terminologies. So yeah. Are there novel ideas? Of course. Do you keep some of those closer? Definitely. But there are consistent things that we're all doing that you can share. And even before we did this call, I shot another drill, another webinar that we're going to put out there. But I like the idea of engaging in that way. I felt like it was a great tool for us to humanize Harvard and make Harvard feel accessible and less intimidating and much more approachable. That whether it was sharing the beauty of campus or the impressive alumni or the amount of academic service or what's unique about the residential life at Harvard, all those things needed to be articulated. And as we were starting, we were fortunate that there was a good library of those things already existing. So we went about on increasing our presence on social because, again, getting back, we wanted to define what Harvard was. I didn't want to rely on somebody else's narrow view of it, because when you have a narrow view of something, it's really easy to be negative or really easy to pigeonhole it in a really simple way, every place, and Harvard is no different, is much more complex than it appears on the surface. And so to minimize that complexity, let's use things that are already existing, but let's also produce our own thing. But not, and I think one of the first things that we also did that we put out there was, let's put some highlights of past performance, because we don't want it to just be about the totality of the experience at Harvard, which is an important part of our message. But let's not forget that they've had really good wins, they've had really good players, they've recruited really good players, that we have really good facilities. We don't want to ever get too far away from the lacrosse message, because that's going to probably be, besides the aspiration to go to Harvard, they have to believe that we're going to be a championship caliber team at some point. And so we never got away from that. So one of the first things we did was the defining of Harvard. And I would hazard to guess one of the first things that we ever put out was around, here's us playing lacrosse and we can make really good plays.
That's awesome. Just a couple more questions. One thing I'm always a big fan of asking is like, whether it's a current coach, past coach, lacrosse, non-lacrosse, who are some people that maybe, I guess, like inspire you, that maybe like other sports or other coaches that you're kind of like, maybe you talk to or listen to or read about, that kind of like help you kind of develop a little bit more to your coaching strategy and culture and stuff?
I loved watching Mike Bray coach. He's the basketball coach at Notre Dame. He's unbelievably kind and forthcoming. I would go to their practices and sit right on the bench and watch them play and coach. I was friendly with all their assistant coaches. And so I liked his style, which had an intensity to it, but it was about the players. It was about them learning how to play. I like to say, all the stuff that I know doesn't really matter. What really matters is your ability of your players to digest it and apply it and execute it. So all the X's and O's knowledge is not to impress your players. It's you're figuring out which of that do you distill down and give to them, because it's important. And then more importantly, their ability to execute it in the cauldron of competition in the fourth quarter when the game is tied. So, Mike was a big influence. My older brother, Steve, from a hunger, effort, dedication, commitment to becoming a good player and a good teammate, a great player and a great teammate, I should say. And, that colors a lot of my messaging to my players around, dedication and commitment and selflessness and, supporting as you hunger for your own development to bring other people along. He was, a mentor for me in my own development as a player. I think, my high school coach, Jack Moran, also from Levittown. So it's a whole Levittown thing here, man, is, he took a chance on me. I didn't deserve to make that team as a junior in high school. He had coached my older brother, Steve, who at that point, when I was a junior in high school, my older brother was a sophomore at UVA and one of the best defensemen in the country. I think he, because there was a genetic connection, I think he totally kept me on that team only because he had coached my older brother, and my older brother had already become a great player. And I didn't play a second my junior year. I played attack. And, some people would say I didn't play attack because I didn't play at all. But that started it to play on the varsity my junior year at Chaminade, and to, not play and then look at my brother's hunger and take some of the lessons of what he had done. So, those are probably, and my college coach, two college coaches, Dick Garber, who's, one of the winningest coaches in Division I. Again, I didn't even try out. I didn't bring my equipment to college. My dad had to drive it up. My dad was a fireman. He drove it up after one of his shifts and brought my equipment because I went to watch one of the tryouts and thought I could hang with those guys. And so, Dick Garber and my defensive coach, Eric Kemp, who was, I think I take some of Mike Bray, who's, kind and calm and empowering of his players, and Eric Kemp, who was played at Middlebury and was my defensive coach when I was in college. He was tough and demanding and focused on really little things, little micro elements. I think that the combination of all those guys kind of helps. And obviously Coach Corrigan, coaching with him for so long, his command of X's and O's and preparation. So if you look at all of those guys kind of coming together, it helps create the stew of kind of who you are as a coach.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that typically we have these we finish up these like interviews by asking the coach like, all right, what should these young players be like focusing on to get recruited and stuff like that. I actually think you're one of the best coaches, lacrosse coaches in the world. Okay. All right. You've been somebody like a secret, like kind of mentor to me, because I know, like I said, you post a lot of stuff. A lot of us watch that stuff. I'm honored to get the chance to kind of talk to you. I would almost like say, instead of that, telling us what like young kids should do, like talk to us about maybe like what some coaches should do that are starting to get into the game, and how to create like, I guess, a positive culture and try to like, I don't know, maybe give some advice for guys that want to continue to grow within the game.
I think you always have to start with a great understanding of yourself. I think, taking an inventory, if you're, step back, one of the things about doing these webinars and doing coaches clinics is that, you see the real, which you can totally forecast the growth of the game 10 years ago. When you look at the development of coaches clinics, you look at your guys' club system that you've put together, you can totally see it coming, because it was starting to be on TV a lot. Guys were starting to be able to earn a living doing it. And, the attendance at these coaching clinics, that schools were running were totally blowing up. The engagement on social was taking off. So you could totally see it coming. And so, that's almost a bit overwhelming when you're thinking about, advice to give to, a coach coming into the game. I'll answer a different part about players, but for a coach, it's almost overwhelming the amount of content that he has. And so he almost has to curate it in a way that becomes digestible for him. But I think you have to start with yourself, like knowing your own personality, knowing your own aspirations, why you're doing it. Is it about connectivity? Is it about, it should be about financials, because nobody's really doing that well doing it. But, why are you doing it? And what does it fuel and feed in you? I know why I do it. I love the connection with players and helping them get better as people and teammates. But knowing your why, I think, becomes really important. I know that's a cliche, but I think that's really important, because knowing why you do it, will fuel your hunger for excellence. Starting with, with a lot of guys who get into it, they're coming from a high school program or a college program that was really formative, just like it was for me. And what are you going to bring from them that you believe can be successful? That becomes really important. What did you learn from your high school coach? What did you learn from your college coach? And what of that are you going to distill out and drag out? And that'll probably become the foundation form of your coaching. And then with all the stuff that's out there on various YouTube channels and Instagram Live and Twitter and things like that, what do you like? Because you can't like everything, because then you won't have an ethos of your own coaching, like what you believe and how you can build on that belief system, what some other people are doing. I think that's probably really hard now, because there's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of people doing some good stuff. There's like some guys putting stuff out there. You're like, I need to unteach that guy when he shows up, And so, but you got to discern. It's like Netflix. Like you're scrolling through Netflix and you're trying to figure out what's your next show. And sometimes you got a recommendation from a guy and you're like, nah, I don't know if I like that guy's taste. Or do you watch the thing that everybody loves? Now you're a follower, but guess what? It still is great. Just because everyone watches it doesn't mean it's not great or not compelling. So it's probably hard to be a guy up and coming, but we're doing these webinars, these one clip, one drill webinars on with Harvard now, and they've been, really well received. The engagement when we do the chat element is really high, and you can definitely see guys, the questions that they get, whether, what my philosophy is on an approach, or what my philosophy is on slide, or where should my body be turned. There's, you never want to be like this is the only way to do it, because you know that's not true. You're trying to find a way that works with your mentality. So I always, I don't want to be dogmatic about stuff. There's certain stuff that I am dogmatic about, but even within that, you're letting guys know that there's different ways to slide and there's different ways to double team, and this is just one way. And if it works for you and you feel comfortable teaching it and you see success, then I guess it works for you.
Awesome. Any words of encouragement for the young players out there?
Listen, I don't think, if you're a senior in high school right now, you're potentially getting double whammy. Might show up on a team that has transfers and returnees, and, you're missing your prom, you're missing your season, and, it's painful. I think it's probably more painful than for a college guy. A college guy's 22, he's mature, he's more fully formed. And listen, I feel for my guys. I wish they were all coming back. I want, that was our whole thing. Our whole mantra at Harvard was, let's find out how good we can be. And, you'll win some of them, you'll lose some that you were really good at, right? So not being able to find that out is crushing. And I miss our guys, I think it might be more painful for a high school guy. He's 17, 18 years old, and you're not as fully formed yet. And so you're going to struggle with that. So, my advice for, the seniors that are going on to play is, you need to continue to be a great leader on the team that you're still on. Even though your team is not competing, you're probably still doing workouts and Zoom meetings and doing some culture building and leadership stuff, is to be really, really engaged in that, because there's huge value. And they'll remember that much longer than the great goal you scored earlier in the season. They'll remember how you treated them, how you spoke to them, how you mentored them, and how you're preparing for your opportunity next fall. Are you still wallowing, or are you leading by owning today and managing today and doing that into the future? I think there's real value in that. As far, and those guys also have to prepare for their college season. So, my advice for guys is you can't wallow in it much longer. We're all sad, but you have to kind of manage today. And there's nobody looking over your shoulder. You can actually lie on Zoom that you did your workouts. Nobody's going to know, but you'll know, and it'll be found out eventually, when you get to a summer tournament or some tournament where you're all together. So, I think the fact that young guys have to learn how to have conversations again with their parents and their siblings, and they're back in the home team, I think that's a great thing. The fact that they have to be, the manager of their own day in academics, like, you have to do great in school. If you're a junior right now, you better be crushing school, because everybody's in the same boat. And any school, whether it's Harvard or some other place, the excuse of, oh, this was really hard, or, my teacher's not great on Zoom, nobody cares. Nobody's going to have any empathy for you, because we're all in the same boat. And if you're not crushing school, even within bad internet connection, teacher wasn't great when you were in his classroom live, and now he's got to do it over a computer, nobody cares. So you better be crushing school and actually doing it better than everybody else, because that's what an athlete does. An athlete is used to dealing with these obstacles. If you're a true competitor and a true athlete, and a true teammate, and a true guy who wants to do great things, this is like a rainy day in the spring, or it's snowing and you have to go to practice. Wishing the snows to stop is not going to stop. Or you just, what? I'm going to stretch in the mud, and I'm going to do this drill in the mud, and my hands are cold. An athlete, whether it's a guy who's committed to Harvard or one of our incoming guys, I told them on the Zoom, nobody cares, fellas. Harvard's not going to care. So crush it. Crush school. Crush your preparation. No one's going to care that you didn't have a weight room. So, I don't know, curl that metal chair in your backyard that's part of your patio furniture. I don't care. That's my message to them. The time for being sad is probably past. Get on to the doing.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it, Coach. I appreciate you spending the time with with us today. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of us are excited to see, how things go at Harvard, and we've got a lot of like fans of Harvard now, moving from Notre Dame with you to Harvard. So
We'll take them.
Yeah, and like I said, I really appreciate you taking the time. You've been somebody that I've looked up to, coaching, and I didn't say it to you, but it was one of the coolest things when I got a chance to play with you a couple of years ago in Placid, and like I said, I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you for the platform and the advocacy, and I think these are great things because the questions, answering these questions are helpful for us because it gets back to our why and how we got here. And it's hard not to look at the past. I want to make that, it's hard not to look at the past, but the situation you're in, if you don't understand why you're doing things, the pandemic will force you to figure out why you work out or how you eat or how you sleep, the key relationships with your families and friends. It super values all that stuff. So I'm trying to, I would never be considered an optimist by the people who know me, but I've definitely become much more optimistic about, reconnecting with family and friends, making good decisions each day, connecting with the people that matter. And, I think if that could be a potential silver lining in all of this, not at the price of people getting sick and obviously, so much collateral damage on this, but I think we have to look for the benefits in all of this. So you doing things like this, it helps me look at myself hard again as I look at myself on the screen, and it'll help me become a better coach and a better husband and a better father. And so I appreciate the opportunity to do it.
Awesome. Thanks again, Coach. Thanks for taking the time.
Peace out.